Good morning. So as a quick show of hands, who in the audience is using Lake Formation or Glue Data Catalog today? Okay, that's good. That's nearly 100%. That's great to see. So for all of you that are using Lake Formation and Glue Data Catalog today, I'm very excited that we're going to have an amazing list of announcements. For everyone that isn't using Lake Formation or Glue Data Catalog yet, I'm pretty sure that at least some of the stuff in this presentation will hopefully help you change your mind. Out of curiosity, did everyone have a great night yesterday enjoying reInvent? Yes. Good, good. You know, just making sure everyone's awake, that's really important. So my name is Leon Stichter. I'm part of the product management team for Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog, and I'm very excited that today I'm going to be joined by Parvaja Narayanaswamy, one of our software delivery managers. So looking back from last reInvent to now, we have an incredible lineup of new features that we wanted to talk about. In fact, we had so many releases that it was very hard to choose what to put into this 1-hour sessions. And we had to make some very tough decisions. So if we don't cover your favorite release or favorite feature, please come talk to us right after the session. To make things slightly easier, we grouped things into 4 major categories. So those are Discover and Secure, Connect and Share, Scale and Optimize, and Audit and Monitor. And at the end, I'm very excited to welcome a special guest on stage, Brad Alford from Duke Energy, to share his journey on using AWS Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog. So having said that, let's dive in. Let's start with a quick intro into Lake Formation. Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog play an incredibly important role in AWS's vision on data governance. So throughout this session, we'll touch on the 3 highlighted capabilities: data profiling, data catalog, and data security and data sharing. When we built Lake Formation, as well as the Glue Data Catalog, we did so to solve 4 major pain points in data management challenges. First off, you're going to have a wide variety of data sources that you need to capture, that you need to understand. And secondly, as that number grows, the volume of data is growing as well. And as the volume of data grows, the number of people that need access to that data is certainly going down either. And a growing number of data sources, a growing number of users, a growing data volume really means that you need some unified way to manage the permissions, to manage data sharing in your organization. And finally, but certainly not least, you need insight into who does what with what data at what time. So throughout this session, and these are the 4 major capabilities or pillars, however you want to call them, we'll touch on these 4. So we'll start by diving into discovering and securing your data, essentially looking at how you get data into your data catalog and how you can apply permissions on top of that. After that, we'll look at connecting with data sharing, and we'll look at how AWS partners extend Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog even further. We'll look at how you apply your tag-based access controls and how you can scale that even more. And finally, we'll look at the audit and monitoring section, basically looking at who did what with what data at what time. Before we dive into all of that, though, I realized that data is incredibly important, data and all the policies that go with it. So I'm very happy to say that over the past year, we've added Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog to the 7 regions that you see on the screen right now. And that means that both Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog are available in all the existing AWS regions that exist today. So the first theme that we want to talk about is Discover and Secure. Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog make it easier to discover your data, to automate your schema management, and to manage your permissions into one single place.
Thank you, Leon. Hi, folks. On that same theme of Discover and Secure, I want to give a quick primer on what the Amazon data zone is and how Glue Data Catalog and Lake Formation acts as building blocks. As customers evolve their data-first journey, they're constantly looking for ways to simplify the way they discover the data sets, share, analyze, visualize, and also, most importantly, govern the data sets. So they're looking for a more simplified, unified orchestration environment where they can do so. And that's really where Amazon Data Zone comes into play. So with the notion of a business data catalog, what Amazon Data Zone provides is, it provides a nice data portal and an orchestration platform where you can create abstraction for your technical assets. So you can bring your assets from Glue Data Catalog, Redshift Catalog, or your custom catalog. So the data could be like, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. So you have your technical assets. And in this business data catalog, with the concepts of domain and projects, you can now create your own business ontology and nomenclature, and you can expose these assets. Typical organizations are made of multiple lines of businesses, and they have a modern data architecture where every line of business wants to have control on what they define as the data product, how they want to be able to define their governance rules, how they want to define their business ontology. So we do want to give the data producers or the owners that autonomy. So in that modern data architecture, when you have different lines of businesses, producers want to first publish their data sets into a nice portal that then your subscribers or your downstream consumers can then subscribe to these data sets. And then there is a nice approval workflow that kicks in behind the scenes. And that's really where authorized users on the consuming side can then subscribe to these data sets, which are actually based off of your technical assets in the Glue Data Catalog. And then behind the scenes, Data Zone uses Lake Formation primitives to be able to transform that approval workflow into authorization grants. So if you really see Lake Formation and Glue Data Catalog acts as a building block, and you can think of this as one unified, cohesive platform where Data Zone gives you this nice abstraction of project, which is use case based abstraction, and you can expose all of your assets and group them into that encapsulation and start sharing with your set of downstream consumers. So for folks who have been hearing Data Zone all along and figuring out how do I plug this with Glue Data Catalog and Lake Formation, think of them as really one cohesive product that is going to simplify your whole orchestration when you think of data discovery and sharing. Next up, I want to touch upon some of the updates that we have on AWS Glue crawler side. When you speak of discovery, right, ingestion is your first core phase in your data strategy. And for folks who are not familiar with what Glue crawlers are, Glue crawlers does the heavy lifting of literally crawling your varied data sources, and they are able to classify them, you can tag them, and so on, and define a structure and schema to your data sets and bring them back into your technical Metastore, which is the Glue Data Catalog. So think of them as the very first step in your data pipeline, right? And in crawler, we have some new feathers to the portfolio, which is the very first update we have is now we have bring your own driver version. So that means you can have your custom JDBC drivers that you want to be able to use as connectors to talking to your choice of the data source. It could be your Postgres, MySQL. So you have your choice of connectors, and you can bring those JDBC drivers and plug them into your crawlers. Next up is I want to speak a little bit about the modern data. As data is vast and varied, and more and more data gets ingested on a day-to-day basis, analyzing them, the key to analyzing them is really performance. You want your queries to run fast because time is money and data is valuable, so you really want to start deriving insights from them sooner. And partition indices are key to especially deeply partitioned data in a traditional Hive Metastore. So when you have such deeply partitioned data, you need to have efficient partition indices so that from your choice of the compute engine, you're able to effectively push down those partition predicates, so you're not spending that immense time in scanning all the partitions and data. And that's really where crawlers are now automating the creation of those partition indices when those tables are ingested into the Glue Data Catalog. Because oftentimes, customers tend to either forget setting them or down the line, then they realize their queries are slow, and then they have to do this as a fast follow step. So this way, crawlers simplify it. And last but not least, crawlers are now fully integrated with Lake Formation. What this means is, prior to this announcement, you would have a crawler job role, and then you would have to go and configure your IAM policies for your S3 data sources, and then you would have to give the needed access grants and bucket policies to be able to crawl those data sources. Now, crawler is fully integrated with Lake Formation, and your crawler job role can work with Lake Formation either in account or cross account. So that way, now you have Lake Formation governing both your regular user and group access, but also your crawler job role. So that way, you have a more unified way to start controlling all your access policies. Next up, I want to briefly touch upon the support for open table formats. It's really interesting to see a shift in the industry, right? Like when data lakes started, customers really enjoyed and loved the, I would say, the disaggregation of the compute and storage. You have cheap and deep storage that you can ingest any kind of modern data, and they loved that level of comfort they got with and flexibility with the data lakes. But now use cases are evolving such that they want all the goodness of the databases, right? Like the traditional database goodness of, hey, I want my ACID transactions. I want to support concurrent transactions, snapshot isolation. I want to support schema evolution. So you want all those traditional goodness of a database into a data lake world. And that's really the pitch of these open table formats, right? So you still have your data in your S3 in your, say, Parquet format or your choice of your data format. And then these open table formats really give you this nice metadata layout that helps give your ACID compliance or transactionality capabilities and so on. So in the recent past, over the years, Apache Hudi, Apache Iceberg, and Linux Delta format are all becoming a choice to be able to support these modern use cases. And we're happy to say, Glue Data Catalog, you can ingest all these table formats and treat them as just like any other native Glue Data Catalog table, and you can mix and match them. So if you want to run a query against these with your traditional Hive tables, they appear as just like any other native Glue Data Catalog tables. And once you ingest into the GDC, then you have all the goodness of Lake Formation. You can start applying Lake Formation fine-grained access controls on top of them, and start sharing them, use Lake Formation cross-account sharing, tagging, and so on. So this would look and feel just like any other Glue Data Catalog table. And then, of course, you can start consuming these from the choice of your compute engine that is capable of supporting these open table formats. Next up is I want to touch upon, throughout the session, one theme is really coming out, very resonating, which is governance is now a first-class citizen. As customers are defining their data strategy, they are increasingly asking for ways to understand and implement, unified governance. And that's really it needs to be a cultural shift, and it's also important that it does not impede the core business value, because new compliance policies, new governance rules come into play, but you do want tools and primitives in place such that it's not a heavy lift and shift or a migration of your complete workloads and processes, but instead you have an organic way to adopt to those compliance rules. And that's really the mission of Lake Formation. We want to give you tools and primitives so that you can slowly, at your pace, adopt to those compliance rules and regulations without impacting your core business proposition. So on that vein, I'm really happy to announce that we GA'd a capability which is called hybrid access mode for Glue Data Catalog. What this really means is, I'll give you the analogy of it, which is, imagine you started your data strategy, you have your workloads. Think of it as you have your traditional batch workloads or some ETL jobs. You have set some job roles and configured certain IAM policies, and things are working fine. You've set some coarse-grained permissions on them. They are ingesting tables. Great. And then you have your classic analysis use cases that are coming up from different lines of businesses, and then there are more compliance regulations. You may want to start defining more fine-grained controls. You may want to define your sensitivity detection on those data sets, and you want to start defining rules against them. So that means the same table is going to now be consumed by other use cases where you want to enforce a much more finer-grained model. Prior to this launch, we used to have a scenario where then you would have to then register this entire resource in a lake formation mode and kind of almost transform your current policies into an equivalent lake formation grants. And that we heard from customers has been a huge lift and shift. So instead, now we are giving you this flexibility and primitive where we are saying hey, the same resource can now operate in a hybrid mode. What it really means is hey, I can continue operating my batch jobs and other things that were configured prior, but for my newer use cases, I will adopt this hybrid model so I can opt in the newer principles to be able to get into the finer-grained lake formation access mode. So the same resource, you can operate in a dual mode, and that gives you flexibility. And at your pace, you can decide either to completely, say, move on to a more stringent, finer-grained model, or you could even choose to stay in a hybrid model if it suits your business need. And as always, because cross-account is one of the core primitive of lake formation, we want to ensure that as your use cases evolve, you're also able to share resources in a hybrid mode so that the recipient account admin has the flexibility to decide how they want to further delegate those grants, whether they can start receiving things in a more coarse-grained, and then they can further do a fine-grained delegation, or they could, again, choose to adopt to their compliance model. So this gives you this nice decentralized posture, too, where every data owner and data producer and a consumer can define how they want to adopt to the permission management. And also, the next step I want to briefly touch upon is we added another capability to the fine-grained portfolio, which is permissions on nested data types. As modern data is evolving, we are often seeing there are deeply embedded types, deeply structured types of data. And oftentimes, customers come up with use cases where they do want to control things at, hey, I do want to exclude only a subfield of a certain deeply structured data set. And prior to this, customers needed to flatten their data sets, and that incurred its own overhead. So now we are happy to announce that we have this permissioning capability on fine-grained of permissions on these nested data types. So you can then finally control your column and row level permissions on subfields within a complex nested type. And then engines would do the subsequent enforcement on ensuring only those filtered data sets are shown in the resultant query.
So out of curiosity, who in the room here is the administrator of their data lake? Good. So in that case, the scenario that I want you to imagine is going to be a lot easier for you. I want you to imagine that you are the administrator of a data lake, and you have a bunch of different tables. So we have purple, pink, and orange tables. At the same time, you have a bunch of different groups of people. We have the purple, pink, and orange people, groups of people. And for all of them, you create roles. So the purple group gets access to the purple IM role to access the purple tables, the same for the pink and orange ones. And that all sounds really good. I mean, that's what you would do today, right? And then questions start to come. Questions from power users like, I need to have access to both the orange and the purple data. Why can't I do that with one single IM role? Why do I need to switch back and forth all the time? From yourselves, or as you're imagining this scenario yourselves, how many roles do I actually need to create to match the groups that exist in my identity provider? From identity provider administrators, how do we map all those users and groups to actual IM principles? And last but certainly not least, questions from auditors. Like, I see that someone accessed this role and accessed the data, but who was that person and what did they actually do with the data? Those are all incredibly important questions, and that means I'm happy to announce that Lake Formation is now integrated with AWS IM Identity Center. That means that you can use the identities coming from your existing identity provider, whether that is Okta, Azure AD, or any of the others that IAM Identity Center integrates with, and use those identities within Lake Formation to grant fine-grained access controls. So I can grant access permissions to leon@anycompany.com in the same way that I would do today to any IAM principal. And since I'm granting access to leon@anycompany.com, all of the underlying services will understand that identity as well. So that means that from an auditability point of view, I have a consistent view of who accessed the data at what point. So looking at the user interface of Lake Formation, and whether you do this through the UI, the CLI, or the APIs, doesn't really matter, your workflow doesn't change. It's the same way that you would grant permissions today to your IAM principals. Instead, those identities now come from AWS IAM Identity Center. And you can obviously use all the features that are supported by Lake Formation. And to get started with that, you simply go to the Grant Permissions tab in Lake Formation and use the new feature that is titled IAM Identity Center. Now, I want to walk you through a quick example to sort of hopefully make this feel more alive. Now, this is my setup. I have Amazon Redshift, I have EMR, I have Amazon QuickSight, and at the far end, my data is stored in Amazon S3, and obviously I use QuickSight and CloudTrail to visualize all of that. Now, my users are logging in to EMR Studio using the identity that they actually are. So they're not logging in with an IAM user, they're logging in with leon@anycompany.com. Now, EMR Studio, on behalf of leon@anycompany.com, is going to need data. So it uses EMR, and EMR, on behalf of that user, will reach out to Lake Formation and the Glue Data Catalog to get credentials to access S3 and get the permissions that it needs to apply. Assuming that everything goes okay, and you actually have permissions, EMR gets the credentials back, and on behalf of the user, EMR then accesses Amazon S3 to get the data. Now, I've been saying on behalf of quite a bit in the last few sentences, and the reason for that is that that actually shows up within your audit trail. So that from an auditability perspective, when you think about those 4 major questions that we had on that previous slide, you can actually see who did what with which data, in which service, at what time, making it incredibly straightforward to connect all those service calls together. So now that we've discovered the data, we've secured the data, let's dive into how you connect all those different pieces together and how you share them throughout your company. So that second theme, connect and share data, is all about letting your users gain insight much more quickly.
So in the theme of connecting and sharing the data, right, like the first and foremost is like our focus is on building primitives. We want to be able to give a place that like your AWS Glue Data Catalog becomes like this core technical Metastore that is really able to like, talk to very different sources, and you're able to like, pull in the data and then apply all of your Lake Formation goodness on top. So in order to achieve that, one of the core primitives that we are focusing on is federation. So we want to be able to federate to different sources and be able to like, make your Glue Data Catalog the world-class technical data catalog, I would say. And as I was alluding to earlier, that's also going to become the core for your data zone and orchestration platform. So you have all of your technical assets in Glue Data Catalog that can later be exposed in further abstractions as you move up the stack. So on that vein, the one thing that I want to quickly highlight is Lake Formation managed Redshift data shares. Last year, pre-invent, we announced the preview, and earlier this year, we went live with this. So a quick primer is that customers increasingly want their data warehouse and data lake journey to get closer. And you want a much more unified way of governing the policies, and you want a more single unified place to like manage them, both your data lakes and data warehouses. So on that spirit, we introduced this Lake Formation managed Redshift data shares, what this really means is like you have data in your Redshift data catalog, and you create this encapsulation called data shares, put your Redshift base tables in them and views in them, and then you can, through this federation primitive, expose those as regular native Glue data catalog tables. And as I've been telling earlier, like once the assets are in the Glue data catalog, you can start applying Lake Formation permissions on top of them. And then your consuming environment and engines can start discovering these assets and running queries against them, just like any other table. So you can mix and match along with other Hive tables, other warehouse tables like Redshift. So it gives you a much more unified, consolidated place to discover your assets and also like, define fine-grained permissions on top. And on the vein of an extension to this, we did support a new capability called the cross-region capability. So what that really means is in a modern data mesh architecture, we realize like, you do have data sources that are in a different region. You may want to have like your central Lake Formation account in a different region where you want to control the governance and audit. And then you may have different downstream consumers and lines of businesses that are also diverse globally. So in order to support this, we added this capability to be fully cross-region. So your consumer, your governance account, and your producer data share environment, they can all be in multi-region. Next up, speaking of building on the federation primitive, we went live with Hive Metastore federation. That means, like again, like you may have very different data sources. You may have your choice of on-prem Hive Metastore or any other third-party Metastore that is Hive compatible. Then we are able to like connect with them and then dynamically pull the data sets into the Glue data catalog as a native first-class tables in the GDC. So this is, again, building on top of the federation primitive. And once you have that, then you can start sharing those data sets using the Lake Formation primitive and start applying fine-grained permissions. So on that vein, I'm happy to announce that we did launch this Sunday, I would say, the CloudTrail Lake Federation. So for folks who are not familiar with what AWS CloudTrail Lake is, CloudTrail Lake is a managed data lake that lets you store, secure, analyze, and visualize all the security and audit logs. So now imagine you have use cases where like, hey, okay, I have all these security logs, but I do want for my use case, some operational or IT use case that I want to be able to run queries or join them with other tables that are not in the CloudTrail Lake, that are, say, in your regular Glue data catalog. Now, with the federation primitive, we have the capability that you can go to your CloudTrail Lake and just say enable federation. So that way, like your assets in the CloudTrail Lake are exposed as a native first-class tables in the Glue data catalog. And then again, behind the scenes, like it would just appear as a native table, and then we are able to connect to those data sources and pull them, and then they would look and feel like any other native table. So that is the powerful capability that we have with CloudTrail Lake Federation, and then you can start querying them through your choice of engine, and Athena is the first one that we have launched for this reInvent. Next up, I want to talk about views. As I was alluding to earlier, in the world of open table formats, how customers are always seeking all the goodness of databases in a data lake world, this is again a common theme, right? Views is an age-old database concept, but it's a very powerful concept, right? It gives you this nice abstraction of like, hey, okay, I have all my base tables that I want to join and run fancy queries on them, and views give you this nice abstraction. So in the data lake world, in Glue data catalog, we want to bring that goodness to you. So we are now offering a first-class primitive called Glue data catalog views. What this is like, again, it's the traditional concept of like, hey, okay, now I can actually create a view, which is nothing but you give your SQL definition of how you want to create a view. It could be joining multiple base tables. And the point to note here is that those base tables could be a native Glue data catalog table, could be a federated table, could be a cross-account table. So once you have them in your catalog, it just looks and feels like any other table. So you can first create a view by saying like, hey, this is the view that I want to create. And that would appear as an entity, as a first-class object in the Glue data catalog. And then next up is we spoke to many customers and realized that as your choice of compute and your use cases evolve, there are nuances and differences across all the engines, right? Like, when you think of a SQL, the dialect and semantic differences between Spark and Redshift and Prestos. So we want to embrace and empower your use case in a way that you don't have to proliferate your objects in your catalog. That is, you don't have to go and define a complete new object for every SQL definition because of your compute choice and differences. So instead, we are offering this capability called a multi-dialect view. What this really means is it's still a single view object, but you can now say, OK, I want this view definition for Spark engine, this for Redshift, and this for my Trino or Presto engine. So you can actually segregate the dialects and SQL definition. Well, the intent is the same. At the end of the day, it is still intending to do the same thing, but you still are embracing the semantic and syntax differences that are nuanced within the dialect. So you have that multi-dialect view definition. And then once you have that, a view is a nice abstraction. It just looks and feels just like any other table that you can then start querying against, and you can share it with your other cross accounts and other consumers and so on. Another interesting posture to this is, which is not what traditional databases support, is that typically when you share a view, your consumers should also have access to those underlying base tables. Because at the end of the day, when you're materializing the view, you need to actually know what those base tables are. But we are giving you a nice posture called the definer views. What this really means is, as a data owner or a producer who is creating or orchestrating this view, only that persona needs to have access to those base tables. So once you define the view, then you can actually start sharing that view to your varied lines of businesses and other consumers without having to share the base tables. So that means the consumer running the query against this view need not know of or need not have access to those underlying base tables. So that's a powerful concept, we believe, hearing various customer use cases. So that way you can create this nice abstraction without having to worry about sharing all of your assets to your downstream consumers. And this is a nice example to orchestrate, illustrate that on how you have your base tables. You may have some consent or entitlement tables that you want to join against. But the end result is what? The nice slice and dice of that table is what you want to share without having to share the base tables.
So at AWS, we build services to let our customers choose the right tool for the job. And especially from a data governance perspective, it's really important that you get to choose the right tool that you, as a user, are most comfortable with. So we built our services to be straightforward to integrate with and to extend. Whether it is an existing business metadata catalog, whether it is existing data governance tools, or whether they are existing third-party query engines, we want to make sure that they all can connect to AWS Lake Formation and the Glue data catalog in the same way that internal engines like Amazon Athena or Amazon EMR can do as well. Now, over the course of the existence of Glue Data Catalog and Lake Formation, we've been very happy that over 20 partners have integrated with that already. And today, I'm very excited to announce 3 new additions to that partner list. Starting with Calibra Protect as the service that integrates with Glue Data Catalog and Lake Formation. They allow you to have one single overview as a business metadata catalog of your data and how you, as a user, want to protect it. So you set your permissions within Calibra Protect. Calibra pushes it into Lake Formation, and Lake Formation will make sure that those policies are enforced at the right moment. It uses all the goodness of Lake Formation, like tag-based access control, so anything that you would expect from that integration is in there. Second is Dremio. Dremio is a query engine. Out of curiosity, is anyone using Dremio here? Good, I see some hands coming up. So Dremio integrated with Lake Formation and Glue Data Catalog to get permissions at runtime. So when you run your queries within Dremio, Dremio uses Lake Formation's APIs and the Glue Catalog APIs to get the permissions and at runtime enforce those permissions as you run your query. And last but not least, Prevacera. Prevacera built not one but two integrations with Lake Formation. The first, a push mode, sorry, is essentially as you'd expect. You define your permissions in Prevacera's UI, and Prevacera makes sure that for the Lake Formation integrated engines, Lake Formation gets told of what it needs to enforce at what time. The second one sort of flips that model around, and it is called the pool mode. And as you'd expect from that name, it automatically pools at certain time intervals the permissions from Lake Formation, transforms that into something that Prevacera then can enforce on all the engines that Prevacera is connected with. So whether it is using an existing metadata catalog, using an existing query engine, or using an existing data governance tool, as I said, we want to make sure that you, as a customer, have the best tools for the job. Now, as Pravaja mentioned, cross-region table access is incredibly important because data and tables exist in different places. And sometimes that means different services, sometimes that means different systems, and sometimes that means different regions. In order to make sure that all those query engines that we talked about can access the data where the data is, we've enabled cross-region table access. So that really means if you want to run your query in Amazon Athena can use resource links to get to the data, to the metadata, without having to copy all of that over into the region where you are. So you have the data in your catalog. You have granted access to the people who actually need it. Now let's talk about scaling and optimizing your data and your data governance. And this theme is all about doing things at scale. The first thing that I want to talk about, something that I'm very excited to share, is the general availability of AWS Glue Data Catalog statistics. If you're familiar with cost-based optimizers, who is familiar with cost-based optimizers? Okay, I see a few hands going up. That's great. So a cost-based optimizer is essentially part of a query planner in analytics engines, and they make sure that based on certain statistics, based on certain factors, that they compute what the best query plan is for the engine to use. Especially useful when your table has multiple joins and is a very complex SQL query. So that CBO, that cost-based optimizer, automatically calculates, based on the statistics it has, what the best plan is to go execute. And that's why we're happy to share that Glue Data Catalog Statistics is GA and integrated with engines like like Redshift and Athena. So without that native support, you would have to do all the undifferentiated heavy lifting of getting statistics in there yourself. You'd have to manage source code, you'd have to manage pipelines, and that's just not something that you want to be doing. So with this feature, you can actually start your statistics collection jobs right within the Glue Data Catalog UI or from the integrated engines.
So speaking of scale and optimize, I want to give a quick primer on Lake Formation tag-based access control. So when you really want to scale your permissions, right, like you have a set of resources that are constantly ingested into your data pipeline, and that's really where tags simplify the posture. So tags are typically, think of them as a key value pair or a key multi-value pair, where for the set of resources, you can first define the ontology. You can classify and say like, hey, okay, this is my use case. These are the tags that I want to define. And then subsequently, you assign those tags to resources. So then you actually do the classification and say like, hey, these are the attachment that I want to do. And then start making the grants in terms of tag policy grants. That is, you start granting to your principals and orgs and org units on the tags. So that way, like as new resources are ingested, you don't have to proliferate your grants. You don't have to, again, go and say, like, I want to grant to this principal on this table, but instead, like, your tags are, like, is part of your ingestion pipeline, and they're doing the classification of the resources, and you get that efficient policy management. So up until now, this used to be a data lake admin-only operation. So the creation of the tags and actually attaching them to the resources and doing the tag policy grants. And as data architectures evolve, we are hearing the themes around like, hey, I do want a decentralized architecture where if you really talk about a data mesh, every data owner or a producer in some form or fashion needs to wear that admin hat. So that's where we have now introduced a new capability called the Lake Formation Tag Delegation, where a data lake admin in your governance account can actually delegate the task of defining and creating and managing those tags and tag policy grants to another persona. That could be a data steward, or it could be like, another admin-like persona in your data producer accounts. So this way you get like that autonomy in a decentralized architecture. So every data producer is now defining the ontology of how they want to structure and share the data sets across. Next up, in terms of optimization, I want to touch upon the general availability of a new capability for the Glue data catalog that we added, which is automated compaction for Apache Iceberg tables. As I was alluding to earlier, again, the open table formats are evolving, and small file problem is real, right? As you have modern data, a lot of small files get generated from your tweets and images and Snapchats and whatnot. And on top, you have, say, a record level update that you're just updating some bytes or some portion of your record. So they are all constantly generating more files. And then at the end of the day, for your analysis use case, you want to be optimal. That is, query engines should not be spending tons of time just scanning all those small files. And that's really where, in a classic database world, you have the bin packing. And now in Glue Data Catalog, we are simplifying that and giving you an automated compaction capability. So all you have to do is just go and say, hey, enable compaction. And we use a much more efficient way to do this behind the scenes, that we detect the entropy or the level of the small file generation and file change. And then we start automating this behind the scenes so that your small files are constantly compacted in a much more efficient way. And we do it in a way such that your front-end jobs and queries don't get impeded. And the next theme is I want to briefly touch upon the audit and the monitor capability. Again, as Leon was highlighting, with integration with the Identity Center and with other capabilities that we are adding, we want to make sure you have visibility and insights into your CloudTrail logs and other places in understanding who has access to what, right? That is important. And if we really want that Glue data catalog to be that technical Metastore for all your assets and Lake Formation to be controlling all the grants, then we want to make sure you have better primitives in terms of auditability and reporting. So on that vein, up until now, as I said, there is this persona called Data Lake Admin, which is a powerful role in terms of all the mutable actions that they could do. They control on how the data lake has to be orchestrated and all the grants that are made and so on. However, in a decentralized model, we are hearing hey, it would be good to have an auditor kind of a persona, which is think of them as a read-only admin. So they get a privilege to look into all the resources and all the grants that were made without giving them the full power of making mutable changes. So that's where this capability, we have added it as a read-only admin role with a managed policy. So that way now this persona can be your technically auditor role to be able to monitor the grants. So with that said, I know that this was a huge lineup of things. I'm really excited to share the stage with Brad Alford, who from Duke Energy is an enterprise architect, and he's here to share the data lake journey and how Lake Formation has helped them in their journey. Thank you. Over to you, Brad.
Thank you, Parvaj. So allow me a moment to share a few fast facts about Duke Energy. Duke Energy is a Fortune 150 company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, and is one of America's largest energy holding companies. It's executing an aggressive clean energy transition to achieve the goals of net zero methane emissions from our natural gas business and net zero carbon emissions from our electric generation by 2050. This transition requires significant investments in emerging clean energy technology, diverse generation sources and storage, a smarter grid, and a modern stakeholder experience. This will further require a transformative IT and data landscape to be both an enabler and a force multiplier. Such new goals and priorities, coupled with modern cloud compute, data management, and leaps in AI and advanced analytics, highlight the opportunity for change. Challenges include a rapid proliferation of new data sources, more unstructured and semi-structured data with an increasing opportunity to mine, data volume and velocity increases, data quality issues exposed by new use case experimentation, and limitations of centralization and scale-up architecture, unsustainable growth in private data center capacity and cost, and institutional knowledge at the business edge needed to maximize understanding and value extraction. So business and IT priorities demand a new approach to deliver outcomes with data. High value is placed on delivery speed, reducing time to value, simplifying data access and resource provisioning, building and maintaining reliability into our products, and right-sizing governance with data privacy and protection as a base expectation. We use the data mesh approach and data products, internally branded as a data fabric, to build better data-driven outcomes. The approach also incorporates elements of a data lakehouse architecture and lake formation as a core component. The approach further biases towards decentralization in all but common tools and capabilities, implemented with a self-service model and federated governance. So data products have clearly defined owners, a durable product team, are domain-aligned, focus on value, are built by technologists and business SMEs, integrate with technical data catalog and a marketplace. So with all this talk of data mesh and data products, how does Lake Formation help? It does so by providing a growing set of data management capabilities that enable cloud scale data and analytics, including a governance function incorporating data catalog integration and managing structured data over simple or complex data types. Tag-based access control simplifies data entitlements at scale. Open table formats integrate a wide variety of analytic products and services from third parties, open source, and AWS. These formats enhance the data lake with database-like behaviors, including transactions, upserts, indexes, concurrency, time travel, all while remaining independent of data processing compute services. So now let's get to what is Duke Energy doing. So we start with a product account with all the requisite services to ingest data and then make that data available to other products and other accounts. So you have all those services like S3, your ingestion services, your logging and monitoring, your lake formation, and your glue catalog. And then this product team maintains a manifest, and the manifest describes the tables, the database, the tags that are to be used, as well as how those tags will be applied for permissions or entitlements by the actual product team. Next, we establish a central governance account and built upon a key set of services like Lake Formation, Glue Catalog, KMS, Event Bridge, IAM. And next, we use Terraform Enterprise. Terraform Enterprise actually executes a set of modules that take that manifest file from the producer product repository and actually apply the metadata, the tags, the entitlements, and all that in both the central governance account and then create the resource links, share the tags back to the producer product account, and then set up entitlements there as well. All changes to the data catalog resources are logged. We use a default event bus via Event Bridge to catch relevant data changes or data catalog events and transform them with a Lambda function to an easily interpreted format that is then sent to a data catalog account. In the data catalog account, an event bus receives the central governance account data catalog events, and a rule is set up to process those, and a Lambda function then calls the APIs for the enterprise business data catalog. This keeps the business data catalog and data marketplace in sync with the technical data catalog. Next, we have a consumer data product account, which may be provisioned with a minimum set of services to integrate with the data mesh and Lake Formation, Glue, KMS, IAM, CloudWatch, plus any specialized services required for the use case. To reduce data copies, the consumers access the data in place. And a stakeholder for the consumer data product makes a request to the producer product account. And then the producer product account and the stakeholder there maintains a manifest file specific to each consumer account, which describes the catalog resources to be shared and the entitlements that are required in that consumer account. So then a Terraform module, a consumer Terraform module, was created and used by this process to ensure that there is a role in the consumer account so that the subsequent Terraform processes can have the necessary requisite permissions to create the resources in the consumer account. And then lastly, there's a producer consumer module that creates the catalog resource, creates the entities in the central governance account, the principals, assigns the tags, and then shares those tags back to the consumer account and sets up the entitlements in the consumer account. So then finally in the consumer account, you will have catalog entries in your local account that will allow you to see the resources that exist in the producer account. So where are we in this journey of data mesh? So we've delivered multiple products and re-architected from legacy on-premise platforms. We're actively in development for roughly 50 different data products as we speak across multiple domains. We're actually supporting a data science innovation hub platform with many experiments that are actively underway. We have an MLOps pipeline we call AI Central that is leveraging this architecture. And we continue to advance data product thinking within the company. So where do we go from here? So what's next? Automation, automation, automation. So automating the account creation, automating roles and policies, automating data pipelines. Next, we want to extend the Data Fabric Access Bridge, which is our sort of internal brand for this central governance account model. We want to extend that to support AWS Redshift data shares. And we also want to create bidirectional integration with our business data catalog, meaning we want the customer experience when they want to request access data, that starts in the business data catalog or the data marketplace, and it ends in the back end in implementing the permissions that are necessary. So then we want to experiment with all these new great features that have been created for us in Lake Formation that you've heard about earlier. So Lake Formation, managed Redshift data shares, integration with Identity Center, the Glue data catalog views, hybrid access mode, CloudTrail Lake. We also want to take a look at Amazon Data Zone. Could Data Zone do all that we're doing in our custom implementation, or do we want to continue to pursue our own custom implementation? And then let's explore the cross-availability zone and region considerations to have high availability and a reliable and resilient platform. And with that, I will turn it back over to Leon to kind of close us out.
Thank you, Brad. Really appreciate it. So for our Q&A, considering time, we'll actually do that outside of the hall. As we exit, Parvaja, Brad, and myself will be there to answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I really want to thank you for being here today, being at reInvent. If you are still looking for some amazing sessions, I would check out some of the ones that are on the slide right now. And during this session, we've taken you through the journey of AWS Lake Formation. We've talked about discovering and securing data. We've covered connecting and sharing data. We've covered scaling and optimizing and the audit and monitoring capabilities as well. And obviously, we just heard from Brad the amazing story of Duke Energy, how they are using Glue Data Catalog and AWS Lake Formation in their data journey. Now, at AWS, as you all know, we are a data-driven company, so we would absolutely like to ask you to fill out the session survey that's going to pop up in your mobile app, because we want to make sure that we provide the best content possible to you. Also, if you haven't done it yet, I strongly recommend that you try out who is your AWS data superhero. Mine is Wireweaver, which is why it's on the slide right now. So with that, I thank you all very much for being here. I hope you have an amazing day. I hope you have an amazing reInvent. Thank you.